It's time for the 1430 Connection on 1430 WNAV and 99.9 FM, spotlighting news, newsmakers, and important community issues. Now, with this week's edition of the 1430 Connection, here is WNAV news anchor Donna Cole.
Welcome to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. In the studio with me today is Jane Cox. She's the Chief of Cultural Resources for Anne Arundel County. Welcome, Jane.
Thanks, Donna. Thanks for having me.
Now, full disclosure, I got to meet Jane a couple weeks ago at a local park because this goes back to my dog chasing a squirrel. And he found, which wasn't the first time it had been found, an oyster midden. And I originally thought, oh my gosh, my dog is a genius. He's discovered this oyster midden that goes back to colonial times or even before. I thought maybe the Native Americans left these oysters. And for those that don't know what an oyster midden is, Jane, explain.
That is a very common question. An oyster midden is a pile of oysters that have been left by people before us. Sometimes there'll be Native American oyster middens where Native Americans would have gone to collect oysters, process the meat, and smoke it so that it would be preserved for their winters. And they left behind huge piles of oyster, which is a great indicator of archaeological sites.
So yes, I thought my dog was a genius. He's going to become famous. He found this oyster midden, which had to have gone back to the Native Americans. And anyway, I sent out an email to everybody in Anne Arundel County saying, you've got to see this. You've got to come now and see this oyster midden. And it doesn't work quite like that, but you did end up coming to see it. And you found what?
So when we went out to the site, it was an oyster midden, but it was of an historic nature. And as we walked back into the woods where your dog had already gone, we found a substantial brick and stone foundation and essentially the ruins of a house that once stood there. Based on a quick look from walking around the site, it looks like it was probably demolished or fell down or burnt down. And it could be dating back to the 19th century. And it's a house site that's located on a lovely spot of land looking out over the South River. So we look back through our records with the county, and it turns out indeed somebody had found that site before your dog. So we were able to get a little bit of background information. But in many instances, the county has over 1,600 archaeological sites recorded, and a lot of those, until they are threatened or damaged by unintentional activity or by natural forces, weather, erosion, we really don't have the resources to go out and look at every single one. So we have a pile of documentation, and when something comes to our attention or a citizen finds it, we try to go out, have a look, and document what we can to make sure that we have information on these sites and all of these places that came before us.
Now, with erosion, with weather, with I guess what even opened up this one, which was a multitude of nor'easters, one after another, and high tide, and are we getting closer to the point where we're losing more of this stuff?
We have been doing some research over the past couple of years looking at the impact of these natural events, weather events, erosion, that everybody knows erosion's happening on the bay. And we have found quite a few archaeological sites because of that wave action and activity. Sea level rise is certainly impacting some of them. That's an initiative that the state's been really putting a lot of effort into to look at impacts of cultural resources. The work that's been being done in downtown Annapolis with the Weather It Together program last year. So it's something that's certainly recognized. There are plenty of other threats, though, to archaeological sites, whether it's trees falling down and pulling all the artifacts up out of the ground, or the development pressures that we see throughout the county. So our work with the county is really trying to capture as much of that information and save it, and most importantly, make sure that the public knows about it. That's a big part of our program, is public activity, engaging them in what we can discover. Archaeology, I think, is a very mystical thing sometimes. People are, aren't quite sure how we know the things that we know about these past cultures.
Oh, I thought you were like a rock star. You came in just like Indiana Jones. You knew exactly where to look. You have to look at the base of the tree, you said, because that's right. What was the reasoning for this?
So the tree roots will actually push artifacts up sometimes. So if we have an area that's high potential, that's one of the that's an archaeology secret. You've given it away now. When we do go walk the woods or walk through, that's one one of the things that might spark our interest to go look at it in a more in-depth or scientific fashion.
I should go back. The Chief of Cultural Resources for Anne Arundel County. What is the Cultural Resources Division?
It's an odd name, isn't it? Cultural Resources. People think we might be the Cultural Arts Foundation or something of that nature.
Yes, you're singing that song wrong. We're going to...
So cultural resources are the historic and the remnants of people that have come before us. So the cultural past of our county. And our role is to try to protect the physical remnants of those cultural resources, which include, in the county, we protect historic sites, which include historic buildings, historic districts, archaeological sites, historic cemeteries. We have over 600 historic cemeteries, family plots that are in backyards. We protect those. And we also try to protect historic resources and view sheds with a scenic and historic roads program, where we try to engage with developers during the development process at the county and try to make sure that the best outcome can be achieved when plans are coming forward that might impact historic sites.
And let's talk about one of those when we come back. This is Donna Cole. This is the 1430 Connection. We will be right back. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole, and I'm in the studio today with Jane Cox. She's the Chief of Cultural Resources for Anne Arundel County. And you were just talking about certain roads and working with the developers to ensure that the history that is found is maintained.
Right. One of the ways that we achieve that within our department is actually doing a lot of groundwork and research and studies beforehand, before we are faced with whether a property is historically significant and needs to be protected. So one of the projects that we've been working on, we wrapped it up last year, but in partnership with the State Highway Administration and Dr. Julie Shablitsky, we launched a 3-year program where we looked at the historic and cultural landscape of the entire General's Highway corridor, from Annapolis Mall all the way up to Doors Corner. Looking at that corridor of land, it has been traveled.
Just to interrupt you, for those that are listening that do not know where General's Highway is, it is north of Annapolis. It runs kind of parallel to Route 97 up through Crownsville. It's an 8-mile stretch of 2-lane road running from the former site of the 3 Mile Oak, where West Street branches at Best Gate Road in the south, to Door Corner in the north, where it terminates at Veterans Highway. General's Highway is named because of General George Washington.
That is one of the reasons that it's called General's Highway. It was a major Revolutionary War route. Rochambeau,
right, was
used that route
en route to Yorktown to help our troops win the Revolutionary War.
A few people have placed their feet on that section of land before us, and it really began as a Native American trail. We found a lot of Native American resources that indicated they were using that area, paralleling the Severn River. So they're using that as a way to move through the space through Anne Arundel County. The historic and colonial era was well represented. There are historic colonial sites, the Rising Sun Inn. You mentioned Belvoir, which is another, it's privately owned, but a property that is of great historic significance. It's on the National Register. And so our research really tried to look at the entire continuum of history, the Native American, the colonial, and then the railway that used to run. Some people don't know that a railroad used to run along essentially the same corridor and was a really important connection point between Annapolis and the points north to Baltimore.
A couple of these properties that you've mentioned, they were owned by slaveholders, right?
Certainly, in Anne Arundel County, there were slaveholders. That really was the way that plantations operated with that enslaved labor.
So you found most recently a slave cemetery.
We are in the research steps right now, but at Belvoir, a local that had worked there as a child in the 50s and 60s reached out to us after some work that we had done on this transportation enhancement project grant that we wrapped up. We identified in the archaeological investigations there a slave barracks. This was described in the 18th century documents associated with the property owner at the time, described a building that was the exact same dimensions and made of stone. Mm-hmm. And from those documents, we were able to connect back the archaeological finds. We worked with, again, Julie Shablitsky was the
And this goes back 2 years ago?
That was discovered 3 years ago.
3 years ago, yeah, and I remember visiting that.
Oh,
right?
good, yeah. So that was a really interesting site because it was, it had been kind of forgotten about, although it was sort of in the memory of people that were still involved with the property, even into the 20th century.
Right.
So with that information, a year later, this gentleman who had spent some time on the farm as a kid, he got in touch with us through a couple different routes, and he said, I think I know where the old slave cemetery is. And we went out with him. He showed us a spot that looked very, very possible because of the location in a flat promontory. We did some probing, found a few stones that were not like conventional gravestones that you would imagine today in a historic cemetery, but just very rough ironstone type things that were in a pattern.
Right.
We were really excited to bring out cadaver dogs.
Which is, I mean,
it was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they alerted on several of the areas, and now the question becomes, working with the descendants, we actually know of the connections between the people that we know were enslaved at Belvoir and the descendant community, and we're now talking with them about what they think should be done scientifically. It's obviously going to be protected. It won't be impacted, and now that we know where it is, we can take extra precautions to save it and make sure that nothing ever happens. But then the question becomes what we can learn from the archaeology about the people's lives and learning from that.
Now, how old were these?
We know that there were enslaved laborers at Belvoir in the early 18th century through obviously the Civil War.
And the dogs picked up on these smells.
They did pick up on. They alerted that there were human remains.
That's just. I mean, it's mind-boggling that they can smell this.
It was fantastic to watch. Yeah.
And it's wonderful that all these years later, their relatives, the people that are still directly involved with playing a part in how to preserve this memory.
And that's just a powerful moment when you feel like you can help somebody recover a history that they thought was lost to them, their family, their genealogy, going back into a deeper history, to be able to bring them back and connect. It's a very powerful experience to work with them.
This also speaks to the owner of the property and what they're willing to do, and you want to give a shout out to them?
Absolutely. So it's privately owned by a school called the Rockbridge Academy, and they have been fantastic partners with trying to make this history available, accessible for research. They're really fantastic stewards of such an important site.
When we come back, more about what the Cultural Resources Division here in Anne Arundel County is doing. This is Donna Cole on the 1430 Connection. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. I'm in the studio with Jane Cox, Chief of Cultural Resources for Anne Arundel County. It's just so cool what her department is doing with keeping our cultural resources alive, so to speak.
Thank you. It's very rewarding. I've been with the county for a little over 20 years now, and I grew up here, so it's important to me personally and professionally. So I'm very, very happy that I can have a role in trying to save the history of the county.
It's so important. All right, so we know about General's Highway. You are down at London Town.
Our archaeological lab is based out of London Town. Our team includes professional archaeologists and lab professionals. So we do have a facility down there, and we work very closely with the London Town Foundation. That's in fact where a lot of our early work occurred. The reconstructions that you see at London Town are based on the archaeological work that we've been doing over the past 2 decades.
And so when Jane said it's important for the public to be able to see some of this, that is one place where you can see some of this.
It is, in fact. We have a very working in close partnership with a couple of nonprofits. The London Town Foundation is a wonderful partner. We work with a research organization called the Lost Towns Project, where we are able to bring in, through grant money primarily, to be able to do public programs where people can actually come out and get their hands dirty. We are always open for volunteers, usually about 5 days a week. We ask you to sign up first to participate, but we are always looking for assistance processing archaeological finds, washing and labeling, uncovering and identifying artifacts. And you can really get your hands dirty and get hands-on, you can really come and touch the past.
We were talking about that the day we met. Some of your citizen scientists have turned out to be your biggest helpers, yeah?
They are. A special shout out to a couple of our most dedicated volunteers, Barry Gay, Pat Melville. We've got Kathy, who's our lab, fantastic lab support crew. So, among others, sorry if I've missed any of our most loyal volunteers, but they really do allow us to do a lot of the research part of it, in addition to, development review, which is our primary, goal.
Right.
We really find that it's important to make sure people understand what it is we're trying to protect, and by getting them directly involved, we're hoping to develop the next generation of stewards.
You have an event coming up.
We have a couple of events coming up, but the most exciting one is going to be a field session where the public can come out and dig alongside professional archaeologists. We're doing this down at London Town at a property that we've been given permission to excavate. It's an 18th century house site owned by Alexander Ferguson. We're partnering with London Town Foundation and the Lost Towns Project to be able to offer this program. So if anyone's interested in signing up, we are capping it at only 12 people per day. We'll be out there for 2 sessions, June 20th to 23rd and June 27th to 30th. You can get more information and sign up at the losttownsproject.org website, or you can access that through our county cultural resources website. We've got a link to it on that website as well. We also have 2 other lab activities if people maybe don't want to get out in the sun and the bugs and the environment. 2 other programs coming up on Thursday nights. May 17th, we're going to be doing a basic lab introduction so people can come see what it's all about, see if it's something they might be interested in doing on a more regular basis. And that'll be 6 p.m. on May 17th. And then on June 7th, we're going to be doing a special ceramics workshop where one of the most important artifacts that we find on historic sites are historic ceramics. So this is a way of essentially bringing our volunteers along and educating them, and it's like a little mini school if you want to go back to school.
Okay, cool. You've been doing this for how long?
About 20 years.
Okay, so coolest find in your 20 years.
I have a dear friend that I was early in my career that had a wonderful line, and it's not what you find, it's what you find out. So while we find really interesting artifacts in and of themselves, for me, it's always the putting the stories together. Mm-hmm. It is finding a bit of the past, stories that aren't written down in books. We don't have the story that, an 8th grader reads in their history book. Right. What I really appreciate about what I do is learning the personal stories. What did these people eat? What were their daily lives like? What did they wear? What did their clothes and buttons look like? You get a real a feeling. I mean, when I drive through the county, I feel like I know the people that once lived on that landscape. It's almost like there's ghosts everywhere.
Right.
But it's being able to make that tangible, personal connection back to the people that really made Anne Arundel County what it is today.
And how do you keep that alive for the school kids that are growing up today with the phones and with the Snapchat and with the everything else?
The most effective way is to show them something really gross, like a skull or a jawbone from an animal. Suddenly you have their attention. It's not very often that they get to pick something like that up, and then you tell the story about what that artifact might mean. And so it's really anytime you can do a program with a school group, getting them outside, doing and touching things, it becomes a really effective way of getting them to see history in a very different light.
Oldest bones or artifacts you've found?
We have found evidence in Anne Arundel County of human occupation over 10,000 years old. We have a site that is down on in Jug Bay where we've found projectile points that we know date to about 8,500 BC. And that too, as the summer goes on, if anybody's interested in volunteering and getting involved, we're going to be doing excavations in that area every Friday for the most part through the summer. So if somebody's interested in volunteering, they can get in touch with us through the website, and we'll keep people in the loop as to what days we'll be out and where we'll be excavating.
Perfect. One more time on the website.
It's losttownsproject.org.
Jane, thank you so much for doing what you do and for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
This is Donna Cole on the 1430 Connection. We will see you next week.